We come now to the beginning of the Spar business, but before we start I must relate an amazing coincidence. When I was taking my GCE level exams, my parents and I were living in Cornwall. One of the questions in the geography exam supplied a small, remote area of a large-scale Ordnance Survey map, about which various features had to be explained. You can imagine my amazement that when I looked at the map, it showed the centre of Hope Valley. There was my Auntie Polly's house, the school that had been attended by my mother, the church where many of the family were buried, and the stream where I had often played. I had to be careful in my descriptions not to include features that could not be discovered from the map. At the time I never mentioned my luck to a soul. This is not the exam map, but it shows the same area. Now that he was out of work, Walter thought about the spoil tips, locally known as the Hillocks. This aerial view, probably taken in the 1960s, shows the relevant features. At the front left can be seen all that was left of the Hillocks at that time. Above that is the Sun Inn. The men from the local mines used to visit on Fridays when they were paid. It was also the centre for a Friday market where the wives would attend to buy provisions. The main road is the A488 to Minsterley, and to the right of it what is left of the open lead workings known as Roman gravels. The small road going up the hill passes Field House on the left at the top of the picture. This is a photo of the Sun Inn taken in the 1960s. The spoil tips were originally about 50 feet high. Walter had played on them as a child, and he knew that there were large lumps of calcite and quartz that were known locally as spar. He realised that if he could break them up into small pieces and grade them, he could find a market for them to be used as rough cast or paving. This photo is an example of the spar before it was broken up. This photo, taken about 1890, was provided by the Shropshire Caving and Mining Club and is part of the Ken Lock collection. The lead ore was taken across the road via the bridge to an area where it was dressed and the waste piled up as the Hillocks. The tips were owned by Lord Tankerville, and Walter negotiated with his agent for a royalty of 6pence a ton when delivered to the railhead at Minsterley. Walter leased a small piece of land close to the tips and to the right of the road going up to Bentlawn. He and Andrew Morris, a brother of his wife, built a wooden bench and broke up the lumps with hammers. Andrew had meningitis when he was a child. He didn't make a good recovery, but could do simple tasks. The foreground of this photo shows the area where Walter processed the spar. Next comes the 488 road, then the slope of Roman gravels with the early open-class workings. Thomas Hillage, a brother of Walter, had a long cart, and although the spar was heavy, his horses only had to pull the load downhill along the main road to the station at Minsterley. This map shows the position of the now closed Minsterley station. Walter found several buyers for the spar, although one of them wasn't a good payer. My Auntie May was a fount of Hope Valley history and told me that eventually Walter sent the bad payer a bill on a postcard, and after that he had no problem with him. Auntie May said that her dad's best customer was Stuart Roy, and soon he dealt with him alone. The family eventually moved to Bank Farm in 1923 when Auntie May was 10. This photo shows Bank Farm in the 1960s. The spar business went well, and at the peak Walter employed 20 men, some of whom worked part-time at the farm, particularly at harvest time. I have my grandfather's bank books from 1925 until 1930, and I can see that in 1925 he gave 24 payments to his nephew and foreman, Eric Hillage, which totalled just over £700. Eric would then pay the workers. Grandfather invested a proportion of the spar business profits in war bonds, a government scheme initially started to pay for the First World War. I can see a bank book entry in October 1931 for £500 titled War Bond, and within the margin written 5%. This rate of interest was never honoured, and as a child, even in the 1950s, I remember it being spoken of bitterly during family gatherings. By 1925, several Hillages were involved in the Spar business. Samuel Hillage, known as Sam, Walter's eldest brother, was licensee of the Tankerville Arms for 40 years, and the Tankerville Arms was central to the operation. This photo shows the Tankerville Arms in the 1960s. The Tankerville Arms had come to him via his first wife, a widow, Mary Ann Rogers, who had a daughter, Ada Rogers. The Rogers had been publicans over several generations. Sam and Mary had a son, Thomas Hillage. Mary died young, and Sam then remarried a Sarah Brown and had a son, Eric Hillage, who became Walter's foreman. They also looked after Ada. Thomas Hillage, Eric's uncle, had a lorry and used this for transporting grandfather's spar. Thomas married Ethel Swain and had 3 children, one of whom was Raymond Hillage, who lives in Bent Launt, and we spoke to his son Paul when researching this history. When the loads of spar reached Minchley Station, they were weighed, and what was known as the weights were sent up to the Tankerville Arms. My mother, Lily Hillage, was regularly sent to walk up the footpath from the Bank Farm to the Tankerville to get what was known as the weights. This map shows Bank Farm underlined in blue, the Tankerville Arms circled in green, and the footpath between them. They never explained to her what the weights were and pronounced it in broad Shropshire, so that when she asked for them they would all laugh. She hated going. Unfortunately, grandfather's bank books don't show the payments from Stuart Roy, so he must have had some other accounts. However, there are 3 payments each of a few pounds to Stuart Roy, presumably to correct for the weight of the spar actually delivered. Auntie May passed the 11 Plus exam to go to the Priory Grammar School in Shrewsbury. Unfortunately, it was too far to travel, but Grandma said that before the boys took the exam, they should move closer to Shrewsbury. On Saturdays, Grandma went regularly to the market in Shrewsbury. She had a friend there, a Mrs. Evans, and mentioned to her that they wanted to move. Mrs. Evans said that they had a farm, Villa Farm, at Bigton, and they were wanting to sell. Bigton was only 3 miles from Shrewsbury and can be seen on the top left of this map. Grandma said that they would come to have a look at it on Monday. But Mrs. Evans said no, come now, so that was what she did. Grandma thought it looked okay. So on Monday, Grandma and Walter went to see it in their pony and trap. A figure was agreed upon, hands shaken, and the deal was done. At that time, farms were normally only sold in April or September, but since no agents were involved, they were able to take possession almost immediately. The farm was called Villa Farm, and they were soon installed. Bank Farm, which they'd lived in for 4 years, was rented out to Thomas Hillage. Grandfather had been in the process of selling all the timber that was on his land right down to the brook by the road. This was completed. Some people said that by cutting down the trees he had ruined the valley. However, it was all replanted. My grandparents decided to build themselves a new double-fronted house on their land at Bigton, and a row of houses along the lane to the main road. They called their house the Hollies, and is the house that I was born in 1941. He also went on to sell the land on which much of the modern village of Bigton was built, and later grandfather sold Bank Farm. Among Auntie May's stories was that Stuart Roy had a legal dispute regarding a delivery of spar that had not arrived to a customer. The case was to be decided at the county court in Shrewsbury. He called grandfather as a witness for the defence. Afterwards, as a reward for his help, he took him for a slap-up meal at Morris's. Grandfather had steak, but Stuart Roy had jugged hare, the story of which has passed down generations. They got to talking about their children, and Stuart Roy said that since it was too late for Auntie May to go to the grammar school, a sweet shop would be a good business for her. With this in mind, grandfather built her a shop at the end of his lane, where it met the main road. This recent photo shows the lean-to shop now being used for a chiropodist, the other houses on the Holyhead Road and the 4 houses down the lane. At the extreme right, Bigton Villa can also be picked out, but the Hollies is hidden by the trees. Auntie May ran the shop until she was married in 1937, but always regretted not being able to go to the grammar school like her brothers and sisters. The shop wasn't sold until 1959. This photo shows the shop in more detail. Although he was now in Bigton, grandfather continued with the Spar business and leased extra tips at South Roman Gravels, but eventually in 1930 passed it over to Eric Hillage. Eric continued the business, but concentrated on selling roadstone. He did very well during the Second World War, buying land and acquiring other leases and selling stone for the construction of airfields. When the Tankerville estate mineral rights were sold in 1953, Eric leased the roadstone rights. However, by 1959 he began to run out of steam and was ready to sell up. This is the end of Part 2. Part 3 starts with the resurrection of the Spar business and goes on to discover that Stuart Roy wasn't actually Stuart Roy at all.